Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure.
Hello, Kirsty Carr.
Mr. Tay Rourke, how are you, my dear friend?
I am very well. It's always a pleasure to see you. We're halfway across the world, but technology allows us to be as if we're in, well, not quite the same room because our backgrounds are a little different, but adjoining rooms.
I don't even know what it's like to interact with people that aren't living in a box these days.
But we're all living in a box of some sorts.
I'm in a glass case of emotion.
Break the case, break the case. Cool. So thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. Let's have some adventures. Let's talk about adventures. And as we were talking about before, I think we'll just have joy, connection, and fun for the next hour or so.
I reckon I can subscribe to that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsty. So just tell me like a little bit, and for listeners, like who, like, I mean, I know why we're friends, but but I think I know, but why are we friends?
Why are we friends? Well, there's one fateful day in Mozambique and we sat next to each other on the bus.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the rest is history. No, we have connected over a body of work in alchemy and creative development, and we've both chosen to live our lives in a high creative frequency, and that allows us to go on these adventures of self, to go on adventures in the world, and to really live our truth and what's in our hearts. So being able to connect with someone when that's the setup, I think, is only a platform for like deep and meaningful connection to blossom. And then we're also part of an amazing alchemy mastermind. So we've been holding each other accountable to achieve our hopes and dreams for the last 2.5 years. So yeah, I think that we just vibe with each other, and being, having been on that journey from having a health and behavioral science background to going, hang on a second, this doesn't feel right in corporate. I want to explore what's actually real for me, to going down this path of creative development and the amazing creations that have come out of that, becoming a coach, becoming a healer, becoming a comedian, becoming a performer, a facilitator, so many things.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to slow you down because there's so much in what you just said. So I just want to piece together a few things, and I think maybe we'll just start a little bit from the beginning. So you spoke about a background in health, and what'd you say? And
Health and behavioral science.
behavioral science. And so like, what's the kind of the gist of that, or what kind of has that come to in your life?
So it was really funny how I got into it was when I was at high school and we went to a university open day. I always had it in my head that I was going to be a lawyer because that's what I was told was a successful path for one to pursue. And I went and I sat in on this law lecture at open day at uni, and I was like, oh my God, I am absolutely not doing this. And then I stumbled into this room, and the lecture was called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. So of course I was like interested.
Most people would be.
And it turned out that it was all to do with, like sex was around STIs, drugs was around, illicit drugs, and rock and roll was the culture. And so what I ended up getting into was all this stuff around population health and how we interact with disease and public health messaging and that sort of thing. And I was always really good at personal health and development at school, and I thought, oh, this sounds fun. So I really just kind of fell into it.
Yeah, and that's obviously, I mean, quite topical now, right? When you talk about like public health and sort of like how a population deals with health crises. Yeah, you must have very interesting view, and you're in Australia, where I know Sydney's not in the lockdown that, say, Melbourne and Victoria are, but yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented times. Yeah.
Absolutely unprecedented times. And these days, I still work in the public health space for a part of my time. And I work as the National Policy and Strategy Advisor for Dementia Australia. So it's a national charity, and it's obviously dealing with a very vulnerable group of people, being the elderly and those actually living with dementia and the people who care for them. So it's been a really hectic time with all of the restrictions and then the corresponding mental health issues that come with it, with loneliness and isolation for a group that's already lonely and isolated, and then cut off any source of social connection. It's been a really challenging, interesting, place to be focused on during this time, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that that piece you speak about in terms of mental health, because like it's kind of one of the, the iceberg beneath the water, right? That there's a lot of talk about cases and sickness and keeping vulnerable, healthy, and all of that, which is very laudable. But there's been very little public discussion about what impacts that this has on people. And as you say, you're dealing with some of the most vulnerable, with people that are already isolated, and or maybe even among the most likely to get sick if it's elderly with dementia.
Yeah.
And I mean, what do you see in terms of how the organization or people or governments are dealing with in this particular aspect of what we're living through?
I mean, I think it's a really challenging thing because there's so much risk, and particularly in the aged care space in Australia, everything kind of comes down to managing risk and who's accountable, because if people start dying on the watch of a particular aged care provider, they're obviously going to get reprimanded for it. So it's about being able to initiate technological innovation and looking at ways in which people can maintain human connection without actually being physically present. So there's been, in our country, there's been an injection of funding into mental health supports, including outreach services as well as counselling. And we've, as an organisation, Dementia Australia has initiated with some other peak aged care organisations a visitors code, which is about putting certain measures in place that enable older people, particularly those living in residential aged care, to be able to still see loved ones, because I think a lot of the anxiety is around that not knowing and not being able to have that contact and support one another. So yeah, there is a bit of a push towards, okay, well, how can we make this better, because this is going to be an ongoing thing for God knows how long.
Yeah, I mean, that sense of like the isolation you talk about, and like in some cases not even able to see a loved one, physically, or it's behind glass, or it's several steps removed from actually being able to give that person touch, physical contact that I think we all long for, and particularly when talking about like elderly and being able to go see them, but the risk of keeping people safe, but also what it does to everybody involved when you just kind of create this divide of actual physical connection. And I mean, it goes to, obviously we're separated by country, but like we're all kind of starting to move into this kind of new digital space, digital world, where kind of like everything just is done through a computer screen or removed.
Yeah, it's nuts. So it's
nuts.
About trying to find ways in which you can facilitate human connection the best way as possible, because that's what everybody, in my opinion, needs right now, right? The world needs more love, it needs more connection, it needs more people coming from a place of kindness and compassion.
Yeah, I mean, and just it gets to one of the things that I know you've been involved in recently, so sort of an odd transition, but we like that, the connection, right? Because you were in love in quarantine, so I'd like to sort of talk about that, because it gets to this point. It's like, well, normally we would be doing certain things in person, but when that's not available, there are other opportunities, and so people are always creating other opportunities from whatever the circumstances are.
Yeah, it's so funny. You couldn't have told me that 2020 would lead to me being on an online reality dating show where the contestants never actually got to meet each other face to face, but we had like a conscious version of The Bachelor, and
What does that mean? Sorry, just what does that mean? A conscious version of The Bachelor?
So there were 7 women and 1 man. It was supposed to be he was a new age bachelor, so he was into yoga, like into mindfulness, had done, Vipassana, was like very into that wellness space. And each of the women was a creative entrepreneur. So there was a musician, a businesswoman, a healer. I was the comedian. There's a dancer. Like everyone, it was like these strong, independent, creative women that are out there making waves in the world and being really successful in all areas of life except for love. So without COVID happening, this show would have never existed. And I mean, God, if I can even begin to tell you the opportunities that it's led to, from me leaning into absolutely stifling fear of being seen and putting myself in this, because I'm one of those people that judge the shit out of reality TV. I'm like, oh my God, these people, like where did they find them? Like they're so narrow-minded, they're so judgmental. And the hilarious thing is that I'm being judgmental of those people. So it's all just a reflection of an aspect of ourselves, right?
Yeah, beautiful. And so okay, so you were on this. So how long was the show?
So it ended up going for, I believe it was 9 weeks.
9 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And so there was kind of virtual dating via Zoom, right?
Virtual dating via Zoom, yes.
And then there was like similar, like kind of audience participation and deciding who was on or off, or who was going to proceed with the eligible bachelor.
Well, yes and no. So it was very, I guess, lovely in the sense that no one ever got eliminated and everyone got to go on a date. So it was very inclusive. So there was never a woman that was like left out in the cold. However, every week, Chris, who was the bachelor, got to choose who he would give his crystal to, because he's new age. So it's not a rose, it's a rose quartz crystal. And so that obviously brings up sense of rejection for the women as well, because if you're not chosen, even though you know that you're going to get a date eventually, if you're kind of the last woman that gets chosen, obviously that's going to bring up things. But yeah, so Chris would choose his date, and audience members would participate in the show, in the conversation. And at one point they did get to the audience got to vote who got to go on a second date with Chris, which luckily was me.
Hey!
Hey! Unluckily, spoiler alert, didn't work out between Chris and I. He didn't choose me in the end.
Yeah.
Pew, pew.
So with the you spoke about like it opened up like all sorts of other opportunities, and I mean we can get to those in a second, but just like I am a bit curious about like how this all like what do you see from that as a project, right? Because somebody decided to create this, right? Yeah, it had this sort of fun aspect, but also you even note that there's a part of you that was a bit sort of like, well, I don't know about this, and like what did it create in terms of community, and you can speak to opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, look, like the biggest opportunity that it's led to is my connection with the creator of the show, Claire D, and she's this amazing performing artist, transformational comedian. She does one-woman shows. She's an author. She's just, you know, a force to be reckoned with. And because there was such a resonance between her and I in terms of the transformational comedy aspect, we've now started our own podcast together. We've also collaborated on a workshop. We ran a workshop last night, and we're now running a 5-week training program. I made amazing connections with the other women in the show. One of them who's over in Bali, and we would have our own date nights every Friday, and we just, you know, connected like the deepest of sisters. And another woman who was really into ocean conservation and sharks. And in a previous life of mine, I was, or I still am, a dive master. So we were able to connect about that. And now we're talking about running a retreat together, which is, you know, going to be a combination of immersion in nature itself, but also immersion in self. So through this, like, and just the friendships developed with the women, I think was just so beautiful as you're going through this really raw and vulnerable public journey where we're all kind of like in the usual reality bachelor shows. It's like the women are kind of like against each other and really judgy and catty and just gross, whereas we formed this really beautiful sisterhood, and off the back of that show we've still remained friends, and we support one another. And it's also led to a lot of fans and followers and people interested in what I'm creating and wanting to get involved in that. And this all came from me leaning into my fear. Like, I had so much resistance. It's like, you know, what if people don't like me? What if this really ruins my brand? What, you know, all these kind of, you know, classic worst case scenarios that the mind loves to explore. But there was just that something, you know, Tay, like the truth has a ring to it. And even though there was so much fear and resistance, that feeling inside of me was like, this is something that you need to do. And at the end of the day, it actually had nothing to do with Chris, and it had way more to do with my development of the relationships with the other women. So yeah, I'm so grateful that I didn't listen to the fear, and I lent into it instead.
Yeah, so I mean, so let's go into that a little bit, because, you know, as you say, right, so let's just like walk through, right? So you're I mean, we can get to that later, but, you know, you're doing some online, you've got a comedy YouTube channel, you've done some stand-up, so you've got some name or recognition. People acknowledge who you are, and the host comes to you and it's like, oh, I want to get you on this show, this reality conscious dating show online. And so, you know, like, as you say, like, your first thought is,
Fuck.
okay. Simple, poignant.
Fuck, it's a noun, verb, and adjective. I literally, it was actually a post. So Claire put a post out. So we were connected on Facebook. We'd never met in real life. And she and I had wanted to collaborate on a project. And she actually put this post out saying, hey, I'm looking for single women between the ages of 25 and 40 who are, you know, entrepreneurial and creative and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. So I direct messaged her. And so I saw the opportunity, messaged, had no idea what it was going to be about. And then she was like, I actually really wanted you to apply. So I filled out this application form. So even though my thought process was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? You're crazy. I was driven by something inside of me that was like, no, this is so important for your growth. And I think, yeah, the thoughts running through my head is just like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're in, you know, early mid 30s and you're now considering going on this dating show. You don't know what this bloke's going to be like. You don't know the other women, like, but yeah, being able to use the tools that we both have, very fortunately, to be like, okay, there's a truth in this. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and so let's just speak a bit about that, because I think anybody can recognize an opportunity that comes up that's going to push somebody to a challenging place in themselves, physically, emotionally, psychologically. We're all familiar with that, and but you speak about that. There's this like sense of the truth has a ring to it, and there's something inside of you that, despite all the resistance or voice chatter, says, yeah, but this is something that I should, must, whatever the feeling is, that there's something else that comes up. And like, how do you know when to recognize that, to recognize it? Because what's interesting is, as you said, is you don't necessarily get what you're expecting, right? Like the idea is, like, you go onto an online reality dating show to get your boyfriend, husband, partner, whatever it is, which is fine. But what you're saying is that actually what came out of it is none of that, and so much more came out of it than you ever would have imagined. So, like, what do what's going on there, really?
I there's for me, this is a little bit hard to put into words, but it's like this feeling inside me that is just pulling me towards these situations or experiences in life that my soul is craving. And what I've been able to learn over the last 5 years, but definitely before that, is reading my body and what feels expansive and like, oh, I'm a bit excited by it, even though I'm scared of it. There's this like, I kind of want to lean into this, versus when something isn't true for me, I feel more closed off and small, and I pull back. And it's being able to have the self-awareness to realize those subtleties when it's like, this isn't a legitimate fear where, like, the saber-toothed tiger is going to come out and bite my face off. It's more of the like, oh, this is a fear of my smaller self or my ego. And I'm like, and the ego, right, is designed to keep us safe, secure, and survive. So anything that it's like, oh, like, this is uncomfortable, but my life isn't threatened, that's when I'm like, okay, there's something in this. And because I'm so clear on my vision for my life and what is true for me to create and what I would love to create, I've always really, I denied it for such a long time, but I am a performer. And this was an opportunity to be able to get out into the world. And who knew that it was going to be a love in quarantine dating show? But yeah.
And you said that thing about, like, kind of knowing for a long time that you're a performer, you're kind of a natural performer. And I can think back to when we met, and you say, like, in Mozambique, like, you're very expressive and, like, want to have fun with a crowd, entertain, right? Be part of the fun that's going on, and helping to create that. But it, like, and I know, you've done stand up, and you have your own YouTube channel, which we can talk about. But, like, there obviously was this kind of even quite significant jump to be able to put yourself out in the public sphere. I remember talking to you a better part of a year ago about starting your YouTube channel, and the struggles that you had just deciding to put that forward. And so, like, but it's this interesting sort of balance, because on the one hand, there's a part of you that, like, you recognize that this is a natural kind of expression of who you are and who you want to be, and yet there's this other part of you that's like, absolutely not, don't do that, that's risk, that's danger, that's equivalent of a saber-toothed tiger or something. And you talk about kind of leaning into that uncertainty, that, like, I don't know, I guess I'm asking, like, how did you get to that point of no return a year ago, when you said, okay, well, launching my YouTube channel, doing this, actually, is what I'm choosing to do, right? Rather than waiting for something else to happen.
Mm. It was a journey. Like it wasn't something that I just woke up overnight and I'm like, yeah, cool, I'm doing it now. It was these gradual steps. It was putting myself on camera and sending those little snippets to a friend. It was then, posting a video on Facebook, and then actually seeing that. And I remember the first time that I posted a video on Facebook, I was shitting myself. I was like, oh my God. And it had such a positive response. Like, it was just like me in my hoodie at home, like riffing on some bullshit. And it had like 1,000 views and all these comments, and people go, oh my God, yeah, I love that. And I was like, oh wow, people don't hate me. They like, the critic in my mind, it's going, you can't do this, this isn't for you. And then, you look for the reasons to validate that voice. And I didn't have those reasons validating it. I was like, oh. And then when you take that first step, or to make it personal, when I took that first step, then the second step was easier and the third step was easier. And it just allowed me to feel more comfortable in taking bigger steps or putting myself out there in a more, in a bigger way. But it's, that even, I don't, my YouTube channel is very humble, but I'm very proud of the content that I put out and the engagement that I get on it. But even still, every fortnight when I release content, that same feeling comes up. Like, I don't want to do this. Are people going to like it? Are they going to judge it? Who's going to watch it? And it's just what I've had to do. And I think this is a big piece in that. How did I get here and was able to put myself out in the world in this way, is that I stopped caring so much about what was happening in the external world and just really relied on that driving force of that. I'd felt so stifled in my creative expression for so long because I felt like I needed to be a certain way to be liked or loved and to survive. But then I was struggling so much. I was like life was uncomfortable in like a really psychologically painful way. And then being able to just express myself, no matter how it lands, or if I get 100 views or 1,000 views or no views, it was my expression. And for me, that started to then become more important than the critic in my head saying, no, you can't do these things.
Yeah. I mean, what I really like is that, describing that first moment, right? Because there's always, and that in a way it kind of never goes away, but there is something in I recognize in what I do, that there's kind of this inertia of fear, right? That has such a strong pull, and there's always voices and beliefs and things you can tell yourself as to how bad things are going to be, how all of the internet is going to organize itself to decide where this Kirsty Carr lives, how we firebomb her, how we expose her for all her idiocy, lunacy, and just pigheadedness, right? Or whatever it is, right? Like that's what we just assume that's what's going to happen, and often, it's just the first step, right? That it's the hardest to take that first step, right? The first real step, right? You can write down lists of what you plan to do and things you'd like to do, but until you actually take action, to say, okay, this is what I'm choosing to do. It, for here, it may be one-off project or something more long term. Until you actually do that, like it is, and it's just a choice, right? To step in to that first thing, as you say, like, I remember talking to you and the decision to post the first video for you, right? There's just all this stuff that comes up, and then and it's like, but then you may have other problems to deal with, the next one or whatever, but it's like but I do think there is this like getting over that first step of just choosing and taking action. I remember reading Stephen King wrote a great book on writing called On Writing. And one of the things that stood out the most to me was he said, everything is the scariest just before you do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's seasoned writer, written God knows how many $1 million sellers, right? And he still like recognizes that. And I talk to other creative people, and they're like, yeah, it's not the fear of what you do or produce goes away, because hopefully people are pushing themselves, and it's not just putting out the same content every week. So those fears do continue to come up, but then you have some memory and awareness of having taken a step and what actually happened, right? So as you said, right, 1,000 people viewed, you had all these positive responses, and it connects with people, right? And it actually goes to, it's, as you say, it's in line kind of with what you're trying to create. So just speak a bit about, actually go ahead and give a plug for the YouTube channel, because it's a great channel. It's really fun, and what it is like, kind of how it came about, what it actually is you're trying to create with that.
Yeah, sure. So my channel is called Spiritual Jackass, and I'm on YouTube and also on Instagram and Facebook. But I would love people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And it's where personal development meets comedy. And it's what I'm really wanting to create, like the vision for Spiritual Jackass is really about this freedom movement for people to fully express all of who they are. And the reason why it's Spiritual Jackass is that we're, in my belief system, other people may not subscribe to this, but we're all spiritual beings having a human experience. So we have that part of ourselves that is more conscious, that is more aware, that, maybe goes and meditates or lights some sage and fucking has some crystals like aligned on their chakras or whatever. And then you've got, the other end of the spectrum is, the Muppets, where, you go out and you're not aware of your pain and you blame everyone else, and you go out and you take the drugs and you drink the beer and you have the sex and you're like, la, 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 la. And at the end of the day, I believe that we're all of it. So no one is better than anyone else, but I have this experience of people who are spiritual or part of the conscious community developing what I would call a spiritual ego, where they think that because they're more aware, it means they're better than other people. So this is very much about giving people that maybe want to be a bit more aware, that want to do more good in the world, but are turned off by spirituality, to have a bit of an access point into how they could see things differently. Some tips and strategies about how they could, manage conflict or relationships, or I really tackle life frequently asked questions, but through the lens of humor. And ultimately what I'm doing is bringing light to the heaviness of life that we can so often experience as part of the human condition. So it's all about enlightenment never being less serious.
Yeah, beautiful. It's such a great message on so many ways, right? Because I think a lot of people kind of run into that, and maybe even have experience. I certainly have had experience of spiritual ego, right? Where I do something or meditate or have some aspect of me that I then look at other people and have a judgment against them, and it's like, well, that's probably not particularly spiritual in the development. But I love your kind of thesis that like we're all of it, right? And definitely in line with what I with what I believe as well, and what I try to encourage in myself and others is like embracing all of that, right? Because there is this like sense in a lot of, a lot of communities, but certainly in the spiritual community, it's like, you've got to rise up to some like perfect pedestaled place, right, that is beyond what you're humanly capable of, but you can do it if you really access your true spirit. And it's like, well,
Oh, if you buy this amazing goddess program for $10,000 and we'll fix all your problems.
exactly, yeah, this whole like fixing, and but your what you're talking about is actually like coming at it from the ground up, right? Or actually both meeting, right? It's like
Yeah.
from the sky down and from the ground up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that ties in, our connection to everything, right? So we have the sky above and the earth below, and it's like both those, that kind of that spiritual side that comes, historically, anthropologically, from above, right? This concept that there's something bigger out there, and then our more kind of base human, earthy sense to us that ties us to who we are and where we are, like, gives us our mortality, right?
Yeah.
It's not about overcoming or foregoing or anything else. It's just about allowing all of that.
That's such a profound point. And I think I just want to really highlight that to listeners as well. There's nothing to fix, there's nothing to overcome. It's about allowing, and allowing it all, and then choosing where to put your focus. And I think that's a really healthy reminder for me as well. I can find myself pushing and trying to make things work and be a certain way. But actually, when you just take a step back and just allow things to unfold,
Yeah.
it's a lot more fun, a lot less difficult, and you get there. I don't know if it's necessarily faster, but you get there in a
Well, I
much more playful
think
way.
yeah, that's for sure. And I think it goes good, like you were talking about, early with, love and quarantine, how
Mm.
there's a part of you that, and you have experience with working in this creative way, where you get a hit, there's something, an opportunity, but you don't really know what it is, but you know that it's for your larger benefit, and
Yeah.
um and you just follow it, right? And then what actually unfolds and happens with it, is, like, many times more removed, and it's that sense of unknown, but also really, like you say, like leaning into that unknown.
Yeah. And that's where the magic happens, right?
Mm,
You can't predict it. No, like no one can. You can have an idea of how you think it's going to be, but it's never what you think it's going to be.
yeah. And I just want to talk a little bit about, because, like, this idea that you spoke about, where spirituality meets humor, and I think you described like what it is you're putting together so well. And I just want to talk about a couple of episodes that you've run. So the idea is, I mean, you put out video content every 2 weeks, and they're episodic, right? I mean, they're around a theme. It's not just you sitting in front of a camera. I mean, they're acted out. There's it's like sketch humor, right? But it has a point to it, right? So it's not just you sitting in front of a camera. It takes a lot of time to write, film, edit. I mean, it shows. But so definitely, check out Kirsty and Spiritual Jackass. It's a great channel. But like, one of the, like, I remember watching the episode you had, that dealt with physical disabilities.
Yeah.
So your friend who has physical disability, and like, I remember talking to you about that, and it was like, there was this sense of you, like, God, can I actually do this? Is this funny? Where am I? Is this okay? But in a way, like, it brings together a lot of what like your professional and your personal interests, or like, what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because having a background, in the aging and disability and health space, and also in diversity and inclusion is also a part of my background. I've always been a bit of an advocate, say an advocate for the underdog, without, you know, putting too many definitions on this, because that's just you know, many people with mixed abilities don't see it as that. It's, you know, people that are, you know, that have the normal functioning. We kind of project that stuff onto them, and that's a lot about what that episode was about. So I have a friend, Ollie, and he has cerebral palsy, and people are always saying to him how inspirational he is, and this was, we really kind of, it was actually his idea for the title. So the title of this episode is called "I'm Not Your Inspiration Porn," because often people with disabilities or mixed abilities are kind of pedestaled by people that don't have a disability as, oh my God, look at them getting out in life and getting out of bed in the morning, and look at them taking the bus, and oh, what am I doing with my life? Like, it's like, shut up, Karen. Like, it's just, so this was a real chance to collaborate with Ollie and share some of those experiences that he has, that are just like, when you put it in a satirical way, you're just like, oh man, like, that's hard. Like, people always checking to see if he's okay. You know, if he goes on a date, like, people asking if he can get an erection or if he's sexual. And, you know, you would never ask that to someone that didn't have a disability. So I thought, yeah, I was really, really scared to put that episode out there, but being able to do it with Ollie and having him with me in the creative process, going like, oh, actually, like, no, that's not correct. And it's like, even for the knowledge that I don't have a lived experience. I don't know what it's like to live with a disability. So it was so powerful and such an amazing experience to work with him on that, to be able to communicate that message, and then also just have a massive laugh about it as well.
And what did you find the response was on that episode in particular?
It's actually been one of the more watched. So I feel like that's not great English, but that's been more watched than a lot of my other videos. It's one of the highest watched ones. And there was a few people that did have a disability that watched it and commented and, you know, said thank you, and that it was great. And I kind of had it in the back of my mind, and so did Ollie. We're like, oh man, we're going to cop some blowback on this one. But we didn't. And I think it also comes from intention, right? Because our intention was coming from a really good place. It was to raise awareness, to bring light to the darkness, like I said before. And I think because we're coming at it from that space, that's how it's also received by people. It's not seen as like, oh, this is crass, or like, how dare they? Like, it's clearly satirical. We're clearly highlighting a point, which is a large, broader issue in society. And so it could, and it has been, from the feedback that I've had on that episode, is that sometimes the content that I share is hard to watch, or it's hard to digest, in that it's so relatable. And they're like, oh man, like, I see myself in that, or I do that. And that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the power of it, right? You know, I mean, good comedy does that, right? It kind of highlights what's really going on, and then people have to sit with that. The listener or viewer or whatever, the participant in a comedy experience has to sit with that, reflect on, well, what does this say about me? What does this say about our society? And you know, there's a lot of a hit back against comedy these days. Like, comedy is very taboo now. Like, I mean, unless it's sort of really just like simple anodyne kind of, you know, sterile comedy that doesn't really do anything. It's kind of canned laughter. You know, true comedy that like you're talking about, that really goes to showing what's really going on. You know, it's taken a lot of flack, right? A lot of comedians who being canceled, you know, all this stuff around, as much about what they say, right? It's like just words, and you know, it's like, So, you know, it's great to hear, like, as you say, talk about, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, you work on this with Ali, and the two of you have an intention around what the product service is going to be, what it's going to stand for, what it's going to provide. And, you know, as you say, right, they're challenging things in it, right? It presents challenging things for a viewer to witness. And yet, in spite of that, or maybe because of that, right, the intention that you have in terms of what you're putting into it is actually more or less how it's received, right, and quite admirably, as you say, like by a number of people who recognize that in themselves, either as somebody who's on the outside or somebody who's with a disability who really appreciates the presentation of that in a very honest and hard-hitting way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think this is a common saying, but it's just definitely something that resonates with me. Like, comedy and music are the two most powerful ways to communicate a message, because they're disarming, and you're able to, yeah, like you said, I know that there has been a bit of a cancel culture for many comedians, but I also think that there's been some comedians that have tackled some really heavy issues brilliantly, like Dave Chappelle. Yeah. There's another woman in Australia, Hannah Gadsby. You know, she tackles like autism and female stereotypes, and you know, there's so many, there's so many people out there just, being able to talk about big issues, but in a humorous way. I think there's so much. There's so much opportunity.
Well, it's such a, you know, like a beautiful medium, and it's like there's something like archetypal about it, right? I mean, you go back,
yes, absolutely.
You go back a few hundred years, right, where you had court jesters, right? That like the king or queen, right? If anybody said something bad or wrong about the king or queen, they'd just be like, off with their head, right? Just kill that person, right? And then there's this one person that whose job is to point out all of the idiocy, lunacy, and crap that's going on, and they're like applauded for it, right? They have this jester, right, who can just like tell the king exactly what's going on, how much of a buffoon he's being, or how much of an idiot the queen's being, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, cool, thanks, and here's your wages or your meal, and for that, right? And you know, there are indigenous cultures that have jester and trickster characters archetypally that, you know, go back thousands or millions of years. So it's really interesting that it taps into something that is not, you know, we kind of think like, oh, comedians, that's a modern, you know, concept, really 50 years, maybe 60, I don't know, like, you know, maybe since the 20s, you know, it's like, we don't really think of it as being kind of this, you know, more ancient kind of, and tapping into a more central kind of archetype in who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting that you mention archetypes, because in the workshop that I ran last night, and in the training course that I'm about to put on with Claire, we actually go into the different archetypes, and the comedian, like the performance archetypes, and the comedian is one of them. Also looking at like the magical child, the messenger, the artist, the creative genius, the storyteller, the teacher, and rock star. So it's interesting, all the different archetypes that, you know, that we can bring to life, and how we communicate our message, and if you can combine some of those, like how much more powerful that is. Like if you're an inspirational comedic storyteller, like, oh, boom, triple threat.
Trifecta.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I mean, you're on this journey, and you've kind of opened up this world to yourself, like got a YouTube channel, starting your own podcast. So what's the podcast with you and, sorry, what was her name?
Claire D. Claire Elizabeth D.
Yeah.
So we haven't actually
Okay.
launched it yet. So that
Well,
one is TBC.
So when it comes out, we'll put it in the show notes when we have the name. By the time this gets released, it might actually be live.
I dare say it will be.
Yeah, awesome. And like, just because like you spoke about how much like Love and Quarantine kind of opened other things up, and what are you kind of working on? Like, you spoke a bit about your vision. Like, what's your kind of your vision over the coming months, or what is it you're trying to create, and how do you kind of go about doing that? Sort of setting up the parameters for what you're going to create a year from now.
Oh man, parameters, boundaries, things that are quite loose in my world. There's just so much that I want to create. The biggest struggle I have is focusing on just one thing at a time and not spreading myself too thin. But ultimately what my intention is, what my vision is to raise global consciousness through transformational comedy. And what I'm in the process of doing right now, because I am so diverse in my background and the adventures that I've pursued in life, that I'm now looking at how I can integrate them rather than them be all separate. So I've got my, the diversity, inclusion, health, aged care, disability background, with the coaching, the breakthrough strategy, the creative alchemy, and then I've got the performer aspect, the comedian, the entertainer, the performer. Like, so what I'm looking to create in the next few months is an integration of all those kind of self adventures, really, to come into a single offering. And so working on, like, Spiritual Jackass is an ongoing thing, because it's something that makes my heart sing. But now I'm looking at integrating the more comedic, performance, captivating aspect into my workshops and into my coaching. And then ultimately what I am creating at the moment is developing a package for the aged care sector, because in Australia at the moment, aged care is just under a microscope. There's a Royal Commission, there's a whole lot of, horrible things that have come to light. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the aged care workforce are trying to do the best they can with like a bit of a shit situation. So what I'm now looking to create is almost like a wellness program, for use of a better word, for the aged care sector, where I'm able to bring in this comedic, lighthearted, humorous side of life with my knowledge of, aged care and policy and health system redesign. And then the coaching and consulting and facilitation aspect of what I do in being able to run these workshops. So what I really love is to really advocate for social causes, but doing that in a way that's fun and entertaining and lighthearted for people. So it's really an integration of all those aspects. But yeah, Spiritual Jackass is, that's about global domination, let's be honest. But I want that to be a global success. I want it to serve people. And that's not coming from a place of like, oh, I want to be known around the world. It's actually that I am so I don't know, I believe in my message and what I'm creating so much, and how much it serves people, and the feedback I've had from the people that watch it. I'm like, I just want other people to have that. And then the workshops, helping people connect to their unique message and raise consciousness and be able to have the confidence to be out there sharing their own unique message. Like, for me, helping and guiding other people through their own transformation is only going to be of benefit to the broader society. as well as obviously the person themselves. And then I'm always going to be someone that cares about the greater good and wants to help people that often can't help themselves. So that is a really long-winded way of explaining to you that I'm in the process of, I feel like I'm on the brink of something pretty great and pretty big in terms of, really shifting gears and creating these transformational opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. And what comes through, like what I get as a reflection back, right, which is really nice because it kind of brings us a bit full circle, is like, it goes back to what you were talking about, like the whole self, kind of the spiritual side and the jackass side, because what you're talking about is how you may have these, there's a part of you that probably can see that you have these three aspects of yourself that are quite separate, disparate. It's like, oh, I've got a policy dementia side to me, and then I've got this comedic side to me, and like ne'er the twain shall meet, right? And I've got this other side of kind of facilitation, coaching, presentation, and what's really beautiful to hear is like that what you're seeing is kind of the meeting of those, right? That where they cross over, and I think it does get to kind of a lot of what we do in terms of creating is where it's like, rather than seeing something about you that is separate and that you've got to keep separate from another aspect of you, it's like, well, when you allow, it goes back to the allowing, when you allow yourself to see, well, there is a natural reason why I'm attracted to both these things or all three of these things, and so there should be a natural way to combine these, right? And like when that starts to happen, for me, there's this synergy of the connections that are starting to be made. It's when you really start to see like progress or response to what it is you're doing, because all of a sudden now, like, you're doing one thing, but it's actually relating to three different aspects of your life. So it's going out in all these different ways, but so it's like you're combining all of who you are and going out to all the bits of who you are.
Yeah, it's amazing, because up until, I'm going to be completely honest, it was only up until a couple of weeks ago, they were still separate, and I was trying to combine the coaching and the spiritual jackass together. And then I've just recently started working with a new business coach, and he was the one that got me to do this kind of that ikigai exercise, at the Japanese, find your purpose thing. And it was staring me right in the face around the aged care aspect. I was like, I could never see how my background in health and policy could ever interrelate to these things that I love around human transformation and comedy. And now I'm like going, oh, well, duh. Like, it's so obvious that I'm like placed to be this person that can really, bring a lot of benefit to a particular demographic or sector of society right now. And that's exciting. And, that's right now. And I'm sure it's without a doubt, that's going to evolve into something different as the cycle keeps going, and I keep growing, and I keep getting creative hits and following the breadcrumbs, and then more doors and opportunities open up. And I think that's such a great thing to remember, is like, on this adventure, it's just like, you never know the next door that's going to open up. But you take that action and you see, and there are no wrong decisions, there's just decisions, and then you pivot from there.
Yeah, awesome. And I think it just gets to, like, I think one of the reasons, main reason why I had you on the show, it's like you've got a very beautiful, interesting, and eclectic background and things that you're doing. But what I love is the message, particularly for listeners. It's like there is this, it goes back to this kind of idea of fixing, right? There's nothing to fix, right? Whoever you are, whatever background you have, like, it's not about like giving that up and quitting and becoming, I don't know, like some yogi in the mountains, or going to be some surf instructor, right? It's like people have particular backgrounds and they have skills and abilities, right? It's not, you can transition from those, you can transform those, but like that's the fuel, right? So like now when you're like, as you say, you see it right in the face, it's like, well, clearly you're the best positioned to bring transformation and humor to what is, maybe doesn't have that and hasn't had that, right?
Yeah.
But so it's really beautiful, like bringing that all together and bringing yourself all together and going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I think that feels like
that feels like a really nice ending. Happy ending, if you will.
10,000 miles away. Thank you, Kirsty Carr, for my happy ending. The sun's shining, so bringing humor in. That's good. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to have you back on the show soon to hear all the wonderful things that you are creating. As I said, I'll put in the show notes links into a number of your ventures.
Oh, thank you, Tay Tay. It is always a pleasure having yarns with you.
Excellent.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, go on, be adventurous. Click the subscribe button. Join us next week for a new adventure. Until then,